Alert, if you think you're having a bad Friday, wait till you hear this story. Right now, we're waiting the sentencing of Joran Sloot, who's just been sitting there and waiting for it to come down. The Dutch national who pled guilty to the murder of a 21-year-old business student in Peru and the primary suspect in the disappearance of American Natalee Holloway almost 7 years ago is facing the judges again today. Steve Harrigan has been following this story all along. He's live in Miami with more. Steve?
Joran Sloot has been sitting in that Peru courtroom now for more than an hour as the three judges read off that timeline of charges against him. He has already confessed to the murder of 21-year-old Stephany Flores. He could be facing a sentence of anywhere from 15 to 30 years. He avoided life imprisonment by confessing, by accepting responsibility, and issuing what he called a sincere apology. Stephany Flores' father is looking eagerly on inside that courtroom and had to hear some very graphic details of the murder from Sloot's confession. Apparently, it all happened after the two left a casino about 18 months ago in Peru. In Sloot's hotel room, Stephany Flores apparently saw an email on Sloot's computer, something negative about the Natalee Holloway case, and she smacked him on the head with an open hand. He then, according to his version, hit her back, first with his hand, then with his elbow in the nose, knocked her out, and then took off his shirt and smothered her to death. Now, in addition to this brutality, there is a degree of cunningness involved in what the judges are calling a ferocious murder. After smothering her to death, he took sheets to clean up the blood, to try and remove any traces, and then went off about a block or two down the road and bought 2 cups of coffee and came back with those cups of coffee. So right now we're trying to find out what kind of a sentence he will face. The maximum would be 30 years in a Peruvian jail. And, of course, the Holloways have also been watching this case with intense interest. Both parents of Natalee Holloway, the 18-year-old Alabama teen, say it's giving them no comfort. The father of Natalee Holloway says he hopes Sloot gets the maximum in jail, 30 years. The mother, through her lawyer, said she hopes Sloot will suffer as much as possible for all the pain he has caused. Right now you have a second family watching on, wondering what the fate, the penalty for this brutal murder will be in Peru. Jenna, back to you.
Yes, Steve, stand by with us. We just saw Joran Sloot stand up, and we're trying to get the translation. We're heard from the judge, John. The judge is there for about an hour and a half, as Steve is mentioning. So we've been waiting for the ultimate sentence, whatever that might be. 15 or 30 years make it a completely different story, whatever the results is.
He doesn't look nearly as smug as he has at times, especially during the period of years when Natalee Holloway was missing. And he was the person of interest, but could not officially be named a suspect, although that happened a couple of times. He was smug. He was, well, he just seemed like the cat that ate the canary a lot.
At moments, as we were watching him, and we've had this monitor on in the newsroom the entire time we've been on the air, he was fanning himself. He was standing up for part of the time. Then he was allowed to sit down. You can see almost through his shirt, you can see sweat. He's been sweating profusely and obviously looking very anxious to get along with this whole process and find out exactly what his fate is.
How interesting, how ironic, perhaps, that the 3 judges who are handing down this sentence are all women. Joran Sloot accused of brutally beating and strangling a woman, and perhaps... Go ahead.
And Steve, on that, I know you're still with us. At times it's been described that he was almost flirting with the judges, that you could kind of see his personality come through the way that he was dealing with the women in front of him. Can you tell us a little bit more about his actions in the courtroom?
Certainly his behavior, his appearance in the courtroom has been a subject of a lot of controversy. He was often yawning, scratching his head, sprawled out with his legs, not standing up straight in front of the 3 women judges. At one point, one of the judges rebuked him, saying he needed to show more respect for the court. This, of course, extremely unusual behavior in someone who is trying to get a reduced sentence, showing that disrespect. They also have described him now, after reading the account of that brutal murder of the 21-year-old, as a peculiar personality, without going into too much detail. They said the ferocity, the brutality of this murder against a defenseless woman who was really in a position of trust inside his hotel room really makes this an extreme and unusual murder, not a simple murder at all. Jenna.
Wiping his brow now, again, sweating profusely through this entire time. Harris, you say that you've been monitoring the situation and have heard that he's been mumbling through part of this whole procedure today?
Actually, toward the beginning sitting at first when they were doing a lot of what they're doing now, and he was standing for almost 30 minutes. So this could be indicative of a sentence coming, and it could be more of this legal jargon that they've been telling him all morning. But at one point he was saying, just get on with it. Just tell me. And you can hear that. Obviously, there are microphones all over the place. You see all the cameras behind the glass here. This is so physically a different young man than the one that I covered on that island in Aruba when Natalee Holloway went missing more than 6 years ago now. I mean, he was a thin, fit, young teenager at the point, now 24 years old, clearly not in the same physical shape that he was in, and the sweating is something that you just pay attention to. At first we thought he was crying because he was sweating so heavily that it was coming down into his eyes. And now you see him nodding. We're monitoring here, hoping for some detail on what's coming forth. But at the time on the island of Aruba, he was someone who people knew all over the place by his first name. His father was in the legal industry there as a judge. And now to see this young man, so different. Back to you guys.
It is so true to look again at him and what's transpired over the last several years, John. What was important in this case, wasn't it, is that whether or not this murder was supposed to be a crime of passion. Geraldo Rivera was on digesting some of the news with us this week, and he said, you know, in Latin American countries, if it's a crime of passion, not premeditated, then you could actually get a lesser sentence if he confessed to the crime. But if they could prove that he was trying to rob Stephany Flores of money, then that would be an issue.
28 years is the sentence. 28 years. He faced, as we understand it, a maximum of 30. So these judges gave it to him just about at the maximum. 28 years in a Peruvian prison for the admitted killer of Stephany Flores, the young Peruvian woman whom he met in a casino and then beat and strangled to death.
Steve, back with us, 28 years. What about parole? I mean, that's something that we know in our American court system. If he's sentenced for 28 years, should we expect that he's going to serve that 28 years?
No, we certainly could see, depending on his behavior, less than that 28-year sentence. But as John mentioned, it is extremely close to the maximum. These three Peruvian women judges obviously not giving a whole lot of weight to the, quote, sincere confession that Joran van der Sloot made. Generally in Peruvian law, it's that confession, that admission of responsibility could get a considerably lighter sentence. The judges in this case talking about the ferocity, the brutality of this murder of a defenseless 21-year-old woman, not giving much weight to his defense at all, giving him very close to the maximum sentence of 28 years. And that time is likely to be spent in a very difficult part of Peru, in the mountainous region near Bolivia. And of course, keep in mind, he's still wanted in the U.S. for extortion with the Holloway case, so it could be at least a decade or more before the U.S. attorneys get their shot at this man who is now a confessed and convicted murderer.
And you know he's thinking he'd rather be spending some time in a U.S. prison than a Peruvian prison. But
we'll see. Natalee Holloway's parents, as Steve mentioned, want him extradited back to the United States. So certainly more to the story. But today, 28 years confessed and convicted murderer, as Steve Harrigan so poignantly points out to us. More as we get it.
Lock him up.